Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Higher Line. And we're going to have a bunch of different discussion points with you guys. I'm with Gary of CCW Safe. We're actually at your guys' hidden range ranch outside of Oklahoma City, where you guys do a bunch of training and thought-provoking discussions. The great and powerful JJ Racaza is at a table back here working. He was out here today doing some filming. And we had dinner last night with one of the founders, Stan, who's off camera, to make sure that we stay on topic. And we had discussed some things, like one of your jobs is, besides helping members and working with guys like me, one of your jobs is helping solve problems so that people don't get themselves into trouble doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Would you say that's accurate?
That's very accurate, yes.
It seems like there's a couple of things that commonly come up. Road rage type incidents, yes, where people let their ego or their temper escalate a situation.
Yes.
And then there was a couple more. What were they? What were some of the topics?
Well,
were you raising your hand, Stanley? Brandishing. So people saying like, you don't want any of this,
yeah,
kind of stuff.
Yeah, brandishing is probably our top claim. We get more claims for brandishing than any other kind of incident. So
for you guys listening, watching, viewing, CCW Safe is a group of, this is how I always describe you guys, a bunch of cops that decided to create a cool company that gave you guys protection similar to what you had when you worked for a municipality or city or whoever you worked for. And then you've got Don West, top mind in self-defense. You got you, Stan, Mike, who else is on that list of these great minds? And you bring in other people like Andrew Bronca.
Yes. We work closely with a network of affiliates such as you, JJ, experts in all different facets of self-defense, okay, from how to carry a firearm, how to interact with law enforcement, how to avoid situations, de-escalation, avoidance, any topic that a concealed carrier, anyone interested in self-defense.
And you guys are not an insurance company,
That's
right?
correct. We're a legal service membership.
Legal service membership.
Yeah, our coverage is a member benefit.
Okay. Legal services membership.
Exactly. This is, most of us here we're law enforcement in central Oklahoma. Around here, the Fraternal Order Police is the police association that advocates for officers. Different areas of the country, it could be the PBA, it could be several other associations. Based on our experience of the representation and benefits we receive from being a member, the company was founded with those same principles, but with a narrow focus of self-defense incidents.
Why not just retain a lawyer? Why can't I just go to my local law office of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe and give them $5,000 and just say, hey, if I need you, call me? Why not just do that?
Well, you can do that. The difference is with us, you're going to pay from $179 up a year,
okay,
to receive unlimited legal services if you're involved in a self-defense incident.
Whereas I'm just $5,000 in with this lawyer, which
you're paying a deposit to make sure that attorney will represent you if you're involved in an incident.
What is the top package? So you got $179 a year.
Yes. We have for permit holders, we have the ultimate plan. It's $519 a year.
Okay.
It covers both the member and their spouse. It includes some civil liability coverage and our max bond coverage. Then on the non-permit side, we have the freedom plan for people that live in states that allow permitless carry. It's the same as the ultimate, but for people without a permit. However, it's more expensive, and we frequently get asked why.
I was about to ask that.
It's pretty simple. There's no background checks. There's no training. We all know that the training received to get a carry permit is minimal at best.
But it's something.
But it is something, exactly.
So the individual probably has been introduced to some self-defense law in this class and use of force kind of stuff by their state statute.
Exactly, and most states require a permit instructor to verify that person has some competency in handling a firearm.
That makes good sense. You guys see the same stuff over and over.
Yes.
Anybody in any job, a dentist sees the same 10 or 20 problems over and over, a dog trainer sees the same 10 or 20 problems. You guys see the same stuff over and over. And of course, there's some anomalies that pop up.
Yes.
The brandishing's a big one.
It's our most common claim.
So what's that look like? The phone rings at the office and some guy tells you a story and you find out that he was...
It usually goes one of two ways. We get the call that I was involved in a road rage, or somebody was threatening, menacing me in some way, and I displayed my firearm and the threat dissipated. I've called law enforcement, they're on the way, I need representation. Or the one is harder to deal with is when we get the call and he says, I was involved in a road rage last week.
Oh, God.
I displayed my firearm, the threat dissipated, but now the police are knocking on my door wanting to know what I did. There's a, I hate to call it a theory, but in law enforcement, the first person that calls 911 is viewed as the victim. They're reporting that I was the victim.
Injured in some way. Or...
Yeah, so what happens is we get the call, and the next thing you know, the road rager has called 911 and said, hey, this guy pointed a gun at me. Now we're behind the eight ball when it comes to offering coverage for
Sure. Because that guy's now saying, the people investigating are going to say, if you were victimized, why'd you go home and go to work and go to dinner and go to sleep and not notify somebody that there was a problem?
My personal feelings are, if it's important enough to go to the gun, even if you're just displaying it, it's important enough to make a police report. Win the race to 9/11 is what we say. 911, if you get on record as calling saying I was victimized, you're generally treated as the victim.
So this brings up a story of somebody I know personally. We talked about the story last night. Young guy, of legal age to own a pistol. He's got a pistol with him, not a concealed carry holder. He's transporting it in a legal manner per the state law that he was in at the time. Some road rage ensues with a motorist. He's in a little sedan, guy's in a big jacked up pickup truck. They're giving each other the birds. I'm ad-libbing, but this is kind of what I envision from the story. This kid, 21-year-old, 22-year-old, backs into a stall at his work, and I think at this point he thinks that this guy is gone out of his life, doesn't realize that the guys followed him in and now blocked him in, like the truck is 90 degrees to his bumper. And next thing he knows, this guy's pounding on his glass, trying to drag him out of the car. And his version, I'm yelling at him, tell him go away. He doesn't go away, so he's got this gun in a bag and he produces the pistol. I don't believe he said, I'm gonna shoot you. I think he said, I have a gun, get the F away from me. He's super shaken up. This guy retreats back to his vehicle, hauls ass to the other side of the parking lot, 9/11. I just tried to talk to this young man in the parking lot. He pointed a gun at me, said he was gonna kill me, his version.
Yeah.
I was in fear for my life. Now I'm back here. I'm gonna wait for the police to arrive so I can identify this dirtbag. Simultaneously, the real victim goes into his work, who's all shaken up. He's never had a fist fight in his life or any type of altercation, is telling his 30-year-old boss, which, not to be demeaning that he's 30 years old, but it's not some guy that's like some dude full of life experience. Holy crap, out in the parking lot a minute ago, and he's explaining what happened, trying to get himself composed. In pulls two squads. What happened? Well, And he says exactly what I just told you, and they cuffed him up, and he spent the weekend in jail. I think there's tons of lessons there, which I'll let you pontificate on, but I got a call on it, and I'm like, why didn't, I went all the way back to the beginning. Ditch down a side road. Why, don't just drive down the road having this, altercation. Just drive away. Go spin a couple loops in the neighborhood and ditch the guy. I'm not suggesting a chase, because he wasn't being chased, but just take an extra left or two and zip back out. And then if he doesn't leave, call the cops and say, hey, man,
Absolutely.
some guy's following me. I'm scared. He's trying to run me off the road. Don't make shit up, whatever the reality is. But instead, these guys started doing the ram's horn things, and it led to cuffs and altering the course of events of his young life.
We hear variations of that story monthly, if not weekly at times. And you hit on something. You've got almost everybody has a cell phone anymore. My 15-year-old daughter carries a cell phone everywhere she goes.
Of course she does.
When this starts to escalate, punch in 911. Call the dispatcher and say, hey, I don't know what's going on, but this guy's following me. I've made a couple turns. He's still following me. Can you send an officer? Now you've established that you're the responsible party. Instead of waiting till the incident comes to a head, producing the firearm, getting the desired result, which is to make the other person disengage, but the other person now calls in and they are the victim. There's each of these situations is unique.
But in just so because that's something you just said. This is the part people disconnect from. Well, no, I'm the victim, and they don't understand that you could tip the scales, and now you are victimizing the victimizer, and the law doesn't just say, well, you initially were the victimizer and leaves it at that. It can go back and forth.
Well, and even though there's cameras everywhere anymore, a lot of times these incidents are not captured on video.
Sure.
So it becomes a he said type incident. As law enforcement, when I would respond to a call, you're supposed to be neutral. You're supposed to allow that evidence to determine how you proceed in a case. But when you've got somebody who's called in and said, a guy pulled a gun on me, your mindset is going to be, well, this is the victim, and that person that is armed is the aggressor. Perspective is such a unique thing. The officers don't always see it from your perspective. Your perspective might be 100% right.
When you say perspective, are you meaning actual visual perspective? Are you meaning your perspective of how you perceived the unfolding of events, or all of the above?
All the above. Exactly. That's what you're taking an officer who the only information they have is calling party reports someone pulled a gun on them. You're taking that on face value, and when you arrive, your perceptions are impacted by the information you've already received. And then when you have a young man who has not articulated to them, at least, that they are a victim until law enforcement shows up, and you have another party who immediately called once the gun was introduced, that skews things and can impact the way the officers view the situation.
Something I talk about a lot, and especially in our courses, what's my goal? What's my friggin' goal? And I know, like, sometimes it's okay to fight. Sometimes we have to fight. Sometimes we have to be violent and vicious, but usually we don't. I mean, there's almost no situation that I have ever been involved in where there was interpersonal conflict. And of course it happens, but I can't think of one in my life where there was not, where I can look back, even if it was just some weird look at a bar when you're in your 20s, but like you can watch the dance. I think it was at Rory Miller that called it the monkey dance. I think it was Rory. He was the prison guard that wrote the book. It's kind of pertaining to like the mindset of criminals. And he talked about, like, the chest bumping, ram's heads, bullshit. And you watch that. And I've been with guys that are champions of industry, leaders of business, and they get a couple drinks in them, and all of a sudden I'm like, who are you right
10
now?
10 foot tall and bulletproof.
Right. But like you're going to get in a bar fight or whatever, just, you know, some stupid road rage thing. You're going to ruin your life, be in the newspaper over the cascade of hormones and stuff, the adrenaline, and we just want to freaking win. And like, that's the part that I fixate on. How can we subtract that from the equation and say, little boy Mickey in your head that wants to be right, and allow this thing to escalate until I can go, look, motherfucker, I have a gun, and not realize that guy might have one too, and be JJ and draw in a half a second and shoot me through the glass and be justified doing so in that moment.
Absolutely. And if you change the facts in your case a little bit, had that young man dialed 911, backed into that parking spot, thinks he's got away from the subject now appears, he's on the phone. Now you've got a recording of the guy pounding
Holy
on the
crap,
windows.
this guy's outside my
He's
car
outside
right
my
now.
door. I'm scared. What do? I have a firearm, a legal possessed firearm. I'm scared that I may have to get it. Now you've established that threat, and there's at least audible evidence of the other person's aggression.
All the nuances of this conversation, not us conversing, but the conversation in that moment, talking with police. You and I talked earlier when we were just prepping and just BSing. There's a fine line in my head between acting and just doing the right thing.
Yes.
And guys over the years, I don't want to name names because they're my friends, but people have written on this topic over and over, and people often misconstrue it to make sure that when somebody sees you, all these boxes are checked, which in one sense is correct, but are you actually trying to do evil or unrighteous acts, but make sure you look a certain way? Like, are you down here kicking the guy under the table so that you can, then, but up here acting a certain way? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, talk about that a little bit, just from a perspective of being a adult male that spent 40 years in law enforcement.
Well, you have to keep your ego in check, first of all. You can't let another person's actions, they're going to influence your actions, but you still have to maintain control of your actions. Your incident again, the incident you relayed, had he been on phone during the whole incident, had he expressed that he was the victim, had he, even when the person was beating on the car, kept that composure and said, hey, 911, I'm scared. This guy is threatening to harm me. The problem is, I think most males go through it, some females go through it. You lose control of your ego, and you're not going to let another person treat you that way. And then it starts to affect your judgment, how you proceed, how you interact with that person. And then the mistakes made frequently, what we see is they want to jump out and fight that other person. Well, nothing good comes from a fist fight. I've been in them. I'm sure you've been in them.
That's fake.
That's right. And I retired out of the homicide unit. I've seen fist fights turn into inadvertent homicides, resulting in prison sentences when all your intention was to punch the guy in the nose.
Which is silly, I think, on that too. When you see comment sections on the internet is a cross-section of humanity conversing, right? I think Andy Stump describes it as like an IQ test for the public. You go like, you're just like literally like spilling your IQ to the world when you read this stuff. But you'll see maybe something that was a lethal force situation, and guys will write, these pussies can't just fist fight like men. And it's like, well, none of my friends are just going to fist fight with you. They're going to hurt you if it turns into that. They're not going to just be like, okay, now you take one.
Yeah.
They think like that's not right either.
And you assume it's going to be a fair fight.
Sure.
And it may not. You don't know that other person. You don't know their skill level.
Or things that have affected them in life that might make them go to some dark place.
Yeah. And he may have just got out of prison. He doesn't care whether he goes back to prison.
Sure. Just found out his girlfriend was cheating on him.
Whatever. We've all let life impact our decision making. But if you are going to carry a firearm for self-defense, you have to be able to put those emotions and keep that ego in check. Letting situations, so many of these brandishing type situations that we see, the member is a participant, and they may have
this little back and forth
in this
game.
little back and forth, and then they pull off on the shoulder of the road, and a monster jumps out of the other car, and you go, oh, I wasn't counting on that. I wasn't expecting him to be 6'10", 300 pounds. Now I've got one option. I can't fight this person, so I got to go to the gun. Why did you get out of the car in the first place?
Right. Now you entered into this agreement, and you didn't have to.
If my personal policy on it, I try not to look in my rearview mirror too much to see if somebody's tailgating me or anything like that.
I think what you're saying is you're not looking to see if people are being asshole drivers.
The brake check has caused more brandishing incidents than anything else.
Sure.
The next thing you know, the guy's mad, the girl's mad, whoever, and then you're on the side of the road. What are you going to accomplish on the side of the road? Both of you feel aggrieved. You feel like that you were right. So you get a choice now. Are you going to stand there and duke it out? Now you've got a gun on. Are you going to fight with a gun on? I've been in fights with my gun on, and that's a primary concern is
Gonna get loose.
Getting loose. We had an incident in on the West Coast last year where a member was attacked, knocked to the ground, his gun came out, slid across the pavement. So now you've introduced a gun to a fist fight.
Right.
Not to say that other party doesn't have a gun. So what happens then? You have the shootout at the OK Corral.
Over
on the side.
what?
Over what? Because he was driving too close to me?
Sure. I think that's the difference between like true criminal violence, some predator that's looking to chop people's heads off or rape people or something like that, or this kind of escalation. And I know a couple guys. One, I tell the story of him often. I grew up with him. He's been to prison, not a friend, but he's been to prison a dozen times. And if you look at him, you'd be like, all right, that guy's probably not somebody I'd screw around with. He's a big dude, tattoos up his neck. And now he's mellowed out, but he's been in fights with like cops 5 or 6 times. The last time he got in fights with cops, one of his baby mamas wanted child support. So he knew 2 or 3 years in the clink meant that he didn't have to deal with her, and he could, sit around all day and lift weights and eat and go to sleep. And he was more than willing to beat up 3 dudes to just not deal with being a dad. Yeah. Like, we're all like, what? But that's a different kind of individual's brain right there.
Absolutely. You touched on something. When I was in the homicide unit, we all think about serial killers and the people that go out there to victimize. Most homicides are not that.
They're not like that. They're not like that psycho.
They're not that guy, that predator that goes out and hunts someone down and kills them. It's a situational incident.
Okay.
They're in a situation. A lot of times it can be because of criminal activity. It can be other domestic type.
Something gets out of control.
Something gets out of control, and as the situation escalates, someone ends up losing their life. So what you see is a lot of opportunity to redirect that situation that is missed. Just backing down, saying, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
So I'm a bitch, right? That's how guys feel. I'm not going to be a punk. I'm not going to like let that guy win. That's, I think, the part that is separate from the how much jujitsu or firearms training I can do. That's the part that guys need to sit alone in the morning and watch the sun come up and decide on their own time.
Get that ego in check.
Yeah, it's
if I have to be looked down on because I bowed out of a confrontation, so be it. I'm old enough. I don't care what you think of me. If you want to challenge my manhood because I backed out of a rapidly escalating situation, so be it. What's the worst thing? Somebody calls you a name, and you avoided potentially serious injury. We had a member right after I started with the company was involved in a kind of a road rage. A driver drove by and he's walking with his wife, and the guy got too close with him, so he yells. And the next thing you know, this guy's very religious, very low key. He just says, "Hey, slow down." And the guy whips around, comes back. Next thing you know, they're rolling in the ditch. Our member has some mileage on him. He's an older guy. He doesn't know what to do. He ends up having his thumb bit off by the aggressor. For the rest of his life, he's got one thumb.
So literally
took the thumb off.
Wow.
So my point being, the guy ended up being convicted, the aggressor. We covered the member. Luckily, it was pretty...
Did the member discharge a firearm?
It's interesting. He knew he was about to lose the physical confrontation. The other party was about half his age.
He's gassing out, probably.
And he knew he was carrying a 5-shot .38 revolver. He was concerned that even though the guy's gnawing on his thumb, that the threat may not be sufficient for the use of lethal force.
Wow.
But he was also cognizant enough to say, I'm about to lose control of my gun. I've introduced a gun to this situation, but I don't know if I can legally use it. So he ends up discharging his own gun in the ground to avoid the other party.
So he just, let's get these rounds out of the chamber.
Just get this round, and now we're back to a physical.
It wasn't make loud noises and scare him.
No, he just simply, he said, I knew if he wanted to, he could take my firearm.
So that brings up another whole silo of misinformation. What gives the person, what threshold must be broken for deadly force to be justified? And I'm sure we could go deep in the weeds on this, but that one, right there, he's chewing your thumb off.
And the threshold, and I answer this question, we get the what if questions, and most of those land in my lap.
Space aliens.
It's exactly, well, and they want to create a scenario. The threshold is simple. Do you have a reasonable, we discussed this earlier, what is reasonable? What people in common might come to the same conclusion.
Okay.
Belief or fear, I've seen it done both ways, but a reasonable belief of an imminent threat.
Meaning right now.
Yeah. There's been a recent court decision which kind of opened that imminent up, what defines imminent. But in my mind, it's right now, right here. And a reasonable belief of an imminent threat of great bodily injury. Having your thumb chewed off, I would consider great bodily injury.
Yeah, these are cool.
And he was an older guy with some heart issues, which brings a new element to that threat of great bodily injury or death. And it's pretty well standard nationwide. You know, there's stand your ground laws and castle doctrine laws, but that basic principle is the same. Can I reasonably assume that this guy is going to hurt me bad, not just punch me in the nose, but he is going to inflict great bodily injury or death?
If you chewed my bone and flesh off, I would have reason to believe that you intend to hurt me.
And in that case, law enforcement had treated our member as the victim. Our representation was mainly to guide him through the process and help him deal with what had happened to him. There was never any fear of him being charged.
Okay. So. What or how, this is like guys like Andrew Branca, Ayub, dudes like that have spent their life kind of talking about this one little thing. How can somebody, in your estimation, a member specifically, kind of build a framework, maybe something that they can, and this is the problem of doing this in the moment, a matrix, so to speak, of like when, not can I, but should I do this? Because that's the other thing. When do I get to?
Yeah, the tough thing, and I tell a lot of members this, there is no booklet, there is no guideline that says if A happens, proceed to point B. Each situation is unique. Each situation will have variables that are different from the previous one. So it is a judgment call. It's a judgment call that you as a concealed carrier must make, that if you're in that incident, you have to, just because you're threatened, you can't immediately go to the gun. You have to, it's a constantly evolving process. And only you are there processing that evidence, or not that evidence, that
information.
Information. And you must be able to say, I thought he was going to severely hurt me or kill me right now if I did not take actions based on him chewing my thumb, based on him straddling me, choking me, which we had in the Steve Maddox case. So many of our members want a script they can follow, and it just doesn't work that way.
And I guess that's not what I'm looking for either. Something that we use, I find over and over, jiu-jitsu, right? I've got friends that are 60, 70 years old that our friend Rob, you know, Rob's got a lifetime of combat sports training. Somebody looks at Rob, you wouldn't say that he's not an intimidating man, but you wouldn't look and be like, whoa, that guy's, you know, a monster judo a wrestler guy. But if he puts his hands on you, unless you are of equal skill level, you're going to get hurt.
Yes.
And when you know those things, not that you've got to become a world-class wrestler or judo guy, but when you subject yourselves to training, or you show up to a class with JJ and you see what some of these guys that are his students show up and are capable of with a gun, you're like, what the heck, that guy's an accountant. Look what he just did. It gives me great pause when I am around people. I have zero idea. I just was at a gym in Pittsburgh. These guys are accountants, lawyers, carpenters, and they're just normal dudes like you'd see on the benches at a little league team or in the pews at church. None of them look like, I'm not trying to be demeaning, but they don't look like hulking football players or UFC guys. And every one of them is capable of great violence. Like being subjected to people like that, I kind of am like, I don't know who anybody here is. You got no idea what somebody's physically capable of doing.
And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, getting out of the vehicle. You're making an assumption that you're the toughest guy in that situation. And if you get somebody that has significant training, has spent years in prison on the weight pile, fighting off people for his commissary or whatever, you don't know that when you're going face to face with a party that you know nothing about. So it's easy to misjudge your opponent's strengths and that sort of thing. By the time you discover them, it's too late. So the best thing is to avoid that situation.
I was like 16 maybe. A truck driver cut me off. I followed him into the grocery store where it was probably 10 at night. He's probably out driving all night to get this lettuce there without wilting, right? And I pull up next to him, and he rolls his windows down, and he's got his tire beater, you know, the whatever.
Tire checker.
Yeah. And he just goes like, and he was probably 70. I was 16, and he wasn't saying he was going to beat me up. He was just like, I'm gonna, like, just in a second, our faces, and I'm like, yes, sir, you know, well, I wasn't even trying to be violent. I was probably gonna be like, what the hell, man, you cut me off. But it was just like, in a second, like, man, I've been driving all night trying to get this produce out of here. I don't want no shit. I'm gonna club your ass if you get out of that car. And was he right? Probably, in that sense. Some guy follows you into the grocery store parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, and I didn't mean him any physical harm, but I saw a guy, gray-haired dude like I am now, and just thought, like, whatever, I'm going to go give this guy the what for.
Give him a piece of my mind.
And he's probably been dealing with this crap for 50 years on the side of the road and isn't going to take, you know, any or let anybody get an inch on him, because that's just the way it is.
And is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right.
What if that escalated? Let's say it didn't escalate. You chew an older guy, I hate to call him old guy because I'm approaching that age myself.
I know, but I think we know what you mean.
But if you chewed his rear end for cutting you off, what have you accomplished?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Right. And that's the broader point.
And most road rage incidents are not intentional incidents. You know, I realized I had to make my turn, I missed my exit, so I shoot across in front of you. I think you're
trying to do something to you.
It's not that they're doing it just to piss you off.
Sure.
So by your actions, you've just thrown gas on that fire. And if in your situation, had you got out and he got out with a club, you could have been injured, or you get a lucky shot in and he dies because of his age. Now you're facing a homicide charge. So what is the juice? Is it worth the squeeze? It's not.
I've adopted on the road for myself, if that, I think I'm 42,000 miles so far this year, and it's the first week of August. That's a lie. Since November of last year, I know that's when I picked up the truck I'm driving in, so 10, 11 months. Enough stuff pops up that I have adopted. I just pull to the slow lane, click cruise off. I slow down to whatever the slowest safe speed is for 2 minutes. Listen to a tune. They've now put 2 miles between us, and then I get to cruising again. Just, I don't want to deal with you. And then chances are, if I'm on an country trip and I'm on the interstate, I'm probably going to just see this person over and over because we're getting gas. I'm just going to go get a coffee, whatever. I don't want to deal with this shit.
I handle it in the same way. I will frequently just take an exit. If they keep going, I take my time and go straight to the on-ramp, and then proceed on. Try not to catch up with them. If they follow you, now things are starting to escalate, but you still have control of that situation. That's where, if it's obvious that they are following you, you call 911.
Sure.
A lot of people say, well, I don't want to waste 911's time or the law enforcement time. That's what they're there for.
And if you truly are feeling...
If you're feeling threatened, if you can make a couple turns and tell pretty quick, this person is obviously following me.
And don't turn yourself into like remote areas. Don't be stupid.
You accomplish two things. You're establishing early on that you're a victim, and you're not allowing that situation to escalate. You've still got some control. You've still got maneuverability. You've got different routes you can take. I can see very few incidents where the situation dictates that you don't have control. Getting stopped at signal lights or something like that.
Sometimes we see things, just, of course, the question I'm about to ask is very much a context-specific question, but you'll see things at a stoplight, at some type of traffic signal, and maybe somebody gets out of a car. I personally, if I felt like I was in fear for my life and it was safe to do so, I'd run a red light and drive away. People look at that, they're like, you'd run a red light? Of course, I'm not just gonna blindly smash on my gas into cross traffic, but if I could, like, what do you say about a situation like that?
Well, first of all, a failure to stop at a stoplight or disregarding the signal light, however the statute is written, fine is a lot cheaper than an assault, an assault with a dangerous weapon, a brandishing, or potentially a homicide charge if it escalates up. Our co-founders, Stan Campbell, spent a lot of time undercover, working with gang offenders, that sort of thing. So what he does and what he's recommended in podcasts in the past is, as you're coming up to a signal light, always give yourself a buffer. Try to, if you're in the inside lane, switch to that outside lane.
So you got some
now you've got, you can cross the yellow line and maybe go in the wrong direction if you have to. You've got enough room that you can maneuver out. If you're 3 cars back and you're on the curb lane and a car pulls up next to you and a car pulls up behind you,
you're screwed.
Your options have dwindled significantly.
Choices.
Yeah.
And of course, we're discussing this, providing you're not driving over innocent people that have nothing to do with the situation. Yeah, we can't hurt other people, saving ourselves.
Yeah. So, keeping tools in your toolbox and keeping options available, I think that falls into that avoidance category. You're taking intentional actions on that slight chance you might have to use them. Just not getting boxed in. If there's an aggressive panhandler, or there's somebody that wants to rob you, that sort of thing, you've got an option to avoid without going straight to lethal force.
Let's go back to brandishing for a minute.
Okay.
One of the things that I often think about is, like, if I need to, for me, and I've never done this, but if I needed to show you my firearm, if I was so concerned for my safety or the safety of the people with me that I needed to show it to you, I probably would have it in my hand. That's just me. Like, I'm not gonna play this game. So, what is the law? Of course, you're Oklahoma lawman, but just in general, the Constitution, generalities here. What does the law usually say about that sort of thing? Like, can I articulate? I was super scared of this guy, and so I thought showing him my gun would maybe diffuse the situation. Can I be okay, or could I still be charged with a crime?
The standard's the same. We go back to the reasonable belief of an imminent threat of great bodily injury or death. And we've covered defensive display before. Just because you feel that threat does not mean you have to immediately go to the ultimate use of force. It's a progression. But if somebody makes you mad, cutting you off, that's not a reasonable belief, and there's no reason. If somebody walks back to your car and goes, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" There's no grounds.
Not commensurate with the...
There's no threat there yet, or at least it's a minimal threat. If that person's pounding on your window saying, "I'm going to get in there and drag you out and kill you," now that threat has increased. But again, that is a use of lethal force, but it's a little lower on the scale. Most states have an exception for brandishing. Oklahoma does. You can't pull your gun unless you're acting in self-defense. It's self-defense as being in an affirmative defense. A lot of people don't really understand that, but in self-defense is a defense to what would otherwise be a crime.
Sure, I am saying I did this. I shot that guy.
You're not saying, "Oh, I didn't do it." You're saying, "I did this, but it's because I believed I faced a threat of great bodily injury or death." Now, you don't want to frame it that way. You don't want to sound like you're reading from the self-defense handbook, play by play.
Why don't you, though?
Well, because I think, to me, as a homicide investigator, a retired police investigator, if you start giving what I would consider a canned response,
something that's real clinical like that.
It's clinical, and it's like, this guy's rehearsed that line. We share a lot of content on social media, and we'll invariably get all you have to do is say you were in fear for your life. Well, not exactly. There has to be some other
Child's
supporting.
balloon pop, so I mowed down a crowd.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, and this also comes into play with when you make the decision whether or not to talk to law enforcement, if you're involved in a self-defense incident.
All right, let's dig into that. So I'm involved in a self-defense incident. You're the cop. You show up. I feel that I acted reasonably and under the local laws and of the jurisdiction I'm in, and you're telling me, tell me what's going on, and I say, I'm not going to talk to you, I need a lawyer.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Well, it's okay, and it's certainly within your Fifth Amendment right to request representation. How I would do it, and a lot of this comes from my law enforcement background, is I'd say, officer, thank you, I was attacked, I want to cooperate completely, but I really need to talk to my legal representation. You may still be taken into custody, but you haven't set a negative tone. If I walk up to you after you've just deployed lethal force against another person and there's injury or potentially death, and I walk up and I go, hey, what happened? You go, I'm not talking to you until I've got my attorney. I'm like, wait a minute, this is why the hostility towards me. Is that wrong or right? The situation is going to dictate a lot of times how you respond. It's important to be aware that anything you say can't be unsaid. And nowadays, body-worn cameras are commonplace in law enforcement. So if your actions are then taken to a jury, and the first officer that walks up and says, hey, are you okay? What happened? And you cite your prescripted decline to speak in a kind of a sterile sort of recitation, that's going to be played for a jury. Is the jury going to say, well, I understand that. He has a right to not speak with law enforcement? Or is that jury going to say, they're there to help him, why is he immediately so negative towards them? But like we discussed earlier, there's not a handbook that says you do this when this happens. I believe in saying as little as possible, but indicating to law enforcement that it's your intent to cooperate.
This is always the challenge for me as I discuss this with people, because I don't want to ever suggest that we should act a certain way, as in pretend. Like if our intentions aren't righteous, then I don't want to have unrighteous actions, but pretend to be a certain way, because that, one, you're full of crap. But if I don't practice this, just like we were talking about people getting traffic stopped, and I know some people, they get pulled over for a speeding ticket and they get an adrenaline dump, not because they're a bad person, but I'm going to be late for work. I don't know if this is going to cost me a bunch of money and make my insurance go up, and people act a certain way, and then the police officer feeds off of that, right? Yes. How do you practice that? How do I practice dealing? And I'm just saying in general, how does a human being, they get pulled over once or twice every few years, how do you practice like interacting with law enforcement? To me, it's more, what am I doing? Shoot, I'm an asshole. I was speeding. I don't apologize. I didn't break your law. I broke our laws. So like, hey man, you got me. You know, I don't even know how fast I was going. It's just like, cause that's what happened. I know I was speeding. I had my cruise control set at 70, this freaking speed limit 65. And there's nothing to be upset about. But when it comes down to this thing that could be this extremely dynamic, life-changing, fear of your life, shit your pants scenario, how do we not somehow practice that?
Yeah. Practice is difficult because you don't know what you're practicing for.
Right.
You know it in that narrow scope of, do I talk, do I not talk? But as far as all of the factors that are involved in that incident, you can't practice for them because you don't know what they're going to be. I've been with this company for 6 years. I spent 35 years in law enforcement. Every situation was different. Every single one of the situations I investigated was different. There might be similar, but there's some unique aspects of that case. So what you have to do is prepare yourself to try to stay calm, exercise your right to representation without looking like you practiced it. I was always concerned when somebody, if I asked to talk to somebody and they recited something I have seen verbatim on the internet or some,
some famous
some
self-defense guy
attorney
wrote it.
that has said, well, this is what you do. I hereby invoke my right to the Fifth Amendment and not speak to you. I also invoke my right to the 9th and the 14th and whatever other amendments that may be applicable. Or you practice acting like a victim, and I don't mean that in the sense of
that's the problem as we talk about it.
You're going to act like a victim.
Sure. Okay.
Because unless you've been in the incidents, and even if you have been, you're going to have emotions involved. You're going to have a blood pressure spike. You're going to have a heart rate spike. So every incident I was ever involved as a law enforcement officer, when I was done, you get that, wow, and it takes you a minute to calm down. That's part of the reason law enforcement officers are not interviewed generally for 2 days. So if you tell that officer, man, I've never been through anything like this. I was attacked. I want to cooperate with you, but I need to speak to my attorney first. I'm just too shook up to do an interview with you right now. But thank you for being here. You know, and that way you're looked at, I think, more on a human level.
Prosecutor says, officer, what was the defendant's demeanor at the time that you picked him up?
Obviously scared. Told me he was going to cooperate, but asked for his attorney. Asking for an attorney may not even be admissible in court. Generally, invoking your right to remain silent can't be used against you in any way. But they can generally say, oh, he was cooperative, but declined to do an interview at that time.
Aggressive.
Yeah, he sounded like he read from a script, almost like he's been practicing for this day. And in reality, when we train with firearms, when we watch this kind of informational video, we're practicing for the potential event. So
I like Lanny Basham. Hey, JJ, you ever read Lanny's book or meet him? Yeah. Olympian, right? Every great shooter has usually read his book. He was a Olympian rifle shooter. And he was really like the first guy, I would say, like in the shooting sports space, but really in the sports space, because he's worked with golfers and all kinds of people, in business too, that started to use self-talk to develop the psyche and develop the ability to work through situations. He would get to these big matches and he'd lose against people that he would beat in training. And he's like, what the heck? And he started to, a couple things. He became focused on his process rather than the outcome. So he stopped looking at targets. He stopped being fixated on counting the score. And he started just working the process of how he mounted the rifle, of how he got a sight picture, of how he pressed the trigger. And he did this in one particular match. Maybe it was the Olympics, and when the thing's over, he realized he set a world record that stood for like 10 or 15 years or something. And that really became like his life's work. With winning in mind was the book he wrote. I believe it's called Mental Management is the System, but self-talk. So he began this self-talk where he would prep himself. It's like me to be calm. It's like me to win. It's like me to see the target in clear focus. And he would pick these different things that maybe he was working on. And this is not unlike the teachings of Christ or some other great, right? Christ said, a man is what he, as a man thinketh, so shall he be. And was it, which famous writer was it that said, a man is what he thinks about all day long. Who was that? Was that Emerson said that. Ralph Waldo Emerson. They're saying the same thing, and Lanny just kind of sorted that. He was on the Army marksmanship team, and back to my point, it seems like we think about all this stuff. I don't mean you and I, but just in the space of people, we think about like checking boxes. And what if instead we started to formulate a way to develop our inner self that maybe we wouldn't even get in a lot of this crap, but then if we did, I've seen this before, even if it's in my mind's eye, I can handle this and it's gonna be okay. Something I tell our students all the time is imagine a drone was flying over you all day long. I mean, maybe it's like your mom said, God sees everything you do. Imagine if a drone was recording you all day long, and at the end of the fateful day you needed to defend yourself, somebody could roll tape of everything you did, or not tape, because nobody puts anything on tape anymore. Like, what would they see? And I think that's why, I remember getting pulled over one time doing donuts in a parking lot as a kid, 15, 16, 17 years old. I knew I was busted. The cop came up, and I'm acting all freaked out, and he's saying, like, why are you all freaked out? And I'm like, well, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm out here spinning gravel all over in this empty parking lot. But I knew I screwed up, and so that's why I'm acting like a a scared kid, because I knew I'm going to get in trouble because I was doing wrong. Well, if I'm not doing wrong, I will know my activities or my behaviors right. Maybe I won't have all that emotional crap.
But being from a law enforcement background, I expect that.
To have some of that fear.
Some of that anxiety when law enforcement
I'm not
approaches.
suggesting you guys show up and a person's just like, it's cool, man, I just killed that guy. I'm not talking about that.
But going back to that invoking your right to remain silent. If I go up and a guy's obviously shook up and the evidence may be somewhat ambiguous, but I've got a guy that says, oh man, I was just attacked, I had to defend myself.
What would that look like, ambiguous evidence, so if somebody understands what you're talking about?
You've got a person with a gunshot wound,
okay,
dead or alive. You've got shell casings. You've got a guy who is able to talk to you who's refusing to talk. You can't make an analysis of that incident based on that information. All you know is you've got one person shot and a person with a gun who's saying, I don't want to talk to you without my attorney. Now you change that a little bit and there's a person standing off in the crowd who saw it all. That can change it tremendously. Yeah, that guy that got shot was attacking that other guy. So now you have more information to act on. So what I tell members is I would recommend not doing an in-depth interview initially. But be prepared to spend a night in the jail. Be prepared to potentially, like Steve Maddox, spend several nights in jail. This may be a case where we're going to bond that member out. Our case on the West Coast happened about the middle of the night. We get the call. He politely declined to give a statement. He was arrested. We posted his bond, immediately got local counsel hired. He spent probably 12 hours in jail. We were then able to address it by getting legal services there real quick and offer the district attorney a proffer. A proffer being kind of a non-binding agreement that just says, hey, if our member were to give a statement, here's what he would say. That can't be used against that member if they decide to proceed with the prosecution. But in that case, it was at a location that had video surveillance and other evidence, eyewitnesses, that sort of thing. So within a week, we had the case no filed and pretty well wrapped up. Take another incident that we had, a lethal shooting. A member was in their home when an assailant broke in. There was a threat of bodily injury. The other party was armed with a knife. Our member shot the aggressor. Law enforcement shows up and he says, guys, I need my attorney before I talk. Well, we got a call the next day from a detective, or I think it was later the same day, saying, hey, I don't want to put your guy in jail. It's the first time since I've been with the company. He won't
tell us enough to.
But he won't tell us enough. All we know is we got a dead guy laying out in the yard and we got blood everywhere. If he will tell me a little bit of something, we can probably be done with this deal. So through the action of some attorneys and that sort of thing, we were able to provide law enforcement with enough information that they released our member. I mean, it was a really clear-cut deal.
You kind of bring up, you've throughout the conversation pointed to various members that you guys have worked with. So you've actually worked with people in self-defense stuff. It's
Absolutely.
not, people don't just pay you for a card they put in their wallet.
Absolutely. You know, one of the questions I dislike the most is when a potential member says, how many wins do you have? Well, how do you quantify a win? In our West Coast case, we were able to address the situation and avoid charges being filed by our aggressive response to the situation.
Right.
To me, that's one of our biggest
That's
wins.
way better than sitting through 6 months of a trial. And
Steve Maddox, 2 years on an ankle monitor. We got a win, but at what cost to Steve? And Steve will tell you what the tremendous emotional cost was.
so just to make sure everybody's understanding, you've got one case, two different victims that use self-defense. One of them ended up in multi-year trial status where was it a jury?
Yeah, went to a 2-week jury trial.
Which is scary.
Absolutely.
Because 12 random people could just not like the haircut he's got, right?
Yeah.
And he got
Acquitted,
so found not guilty, but it cost him years of his life.
For 2 years, he wore an ankle monitor and he could go to work and home and nowhere else without court approval. For 2 years, he was labeled a murderer.
And then this other dude.
And this other guy, this other member, we were able to throw all of our assets to the company. I was with him within about 18 hours of the incident.
That's crazy.
Address his concerns, get him back in a positive mode. We then, at the same time, simultaneously, we've got Don West working with the counsel that he hired. They brainstormed. Don's got more legal experience than you've been alive. I think he's been practicing for right at 50 years. And with those assets, we were able to intercept it. And within a week, he's got his life back. People don't understand that this is going to impact your life. In the immediate time after the event, it's going to impact it significantly. I've been in a lot of jails, luckily not under arrest. I've never visited one that I wanted to spend a night in. So you're going to get to experience what a jail cell is like. Things slow down terribly at that point, and this is what the average concealed carrier has no concept of.
Does it always have to?
Not always.
Is it like this gentleman in the situation with the guy with the knife? Did he end up going to jail?
He was headed to jail.
Okay.
He was taken into custody and was taken to the police station, which by the time they finished their investigation, their initial investigation, that's when the investigator called us and said, hey guys, I don't want to put this guy in jail. I need something so I don't put him in jail. In my 6 years,
Which was kind of a bonus for him because he could have had some young guy.
You don't want to talk to us?
Yeah.
I'll see you. Let me know in a couple days if you want to talk to us. Or what would have happened is we would have posted bond. You're still going to spend a period of hours in jail. Here in our local county jail, if you're booked in and somebody immediately posts bond, you're going to be 12 to 18 hours before they process you in, process you out. So you're going to get that experience. But what I was going to say,
which means that you're taking all your clothes off, spreading your butt cheeks, lifting your ball sack, getting lice spray dumped on you, getting an orange jumpsuit put on,
and you're going to get most likely put in a communal cell, a holding cell, with everything from gang members, child molesters, mass murderers, who knows?
So that's something that I have used in my own self before, like, is this thing worth me getting stripped naked and doused with lice powder to discuss why I did it? No, gonna go home. It's almost never.
I've been with the company, it's about 6.5 years now. I think we're on our 7th lethal shooting that I know of. We've had everything from officer where there's...
When you say lethal, you mean that the
other party died.
Was deceased, okay.
We have had one member actually killed in an incident as well. But we've had incidents where there was enough evidence where the officers thanked them at the end of the day. We've got an attorney hired, we're ready in case needed, and the investigation said, it's pretty clear-cut self-defense.
In those situations, that person could still be open for some type of civil liability?
Well, they could. There is no statute of limitations on homicide, so that case could be reopened.
20 years later, some new piece of evidence.
20 years, 30 years. They usually don't happen, especially where there's a self-defense.
I didn't know that. That's super interesting. So somebody gets involved in a self-defense case. The victim is free to go. The local jurisdiction doesn't have anything to do with it. And 10 years later, 20 years later, somebody comes in and says, hey, remember that thing that happened at the park 10 or 20 years ago?
A new district attorney with a totally different agenda may show up.
Wow.
And reevaluate that. And then touching on the civil
Well, let me just finish that thought real quick. So even if all of that happens, you are still, for the totality of your life, possibly open to some type of prosecution or scrutiny.
There is no statute of limitations. Statute of limitations is a window that charges can be filed. Most felonies, it's in the 5 to 6 year range. On the civil side of it, it's 1 to 2 years after the incident that you have to take action. Once that statute is expired, no other action can be taken. Homicide has no statute of limitations. And then, like you mentioned the civil aspect. I deal with our social media as well. The comments at times are absolutely baffling. You'll have members say, well, make sure they're not members, they're more social media followers. Luckily, most of these are not members. But make sure that person's dead, make sure the other person's dead, that way they can't testify against you. Well, the evidence testifies. The other party, that homicide cases are prosecuted every day without the victim giving a statement. But as we know, you can be found not guilty, or you can have a no file from a district attorney and still be sued. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson beat the murder charges. He was found not guilty. He was found civilly liable and bankrupted from civil action. And the other thing is, I worked for a district attorney's office for my last 10 years in law enforcement. You will not get a get out of jail, this was a self-defense, go forth and live in peace. They're going to say the evidence at this time does not support filing charges. If further evidence is gathered, it will be reevaluated. So you don't get a
clean bill of health.
A clean bill of health, yeah.
That's meaningful, I think, to again give the individual pause about entering into stupid physical altercations that lead to that. It's just, I have a guy I know that at a bar a couple years ago, some drunk guy is being belligerent to a woman. He goes, "Hey man, why don't you leave her alone?" Turns, look back, the guy hits him, breaks his jaw on both sides, knocks like 5 teeth out. Kid's jaw's wired up for 6 months. He's got like $200K in medical bills. The footage disappeared that night off of the cameras at the establishment. Witnesses disappeared because they didn't want to get drug into court.
Nobody wants to get involved.
Yeah, and he thought it was pretty. I mean, there was enough witnesses. It should have been cut and dry. Well, then guess what? The attacker, poof. He left town because he knew he was probably going to end up jammed up and on the hook for it. And no charges were ever filed. And this dude, out of that little stupid thing, to this day, his jaw is in pain all day. He doesn't talk the same way and has got a mouthful of fake teeth.
Yeah, and you have to think of the potential outcome of a case, positives and the negatives. And so many times we have in our mind that what we're going to do is the right thing.
We talked about that over dinner a little bit. Yeah. What's right? Of course, we got the law. We know is the arbiter of right and wrong, but
was he right for interceding? Yeah, I mean, it's chivalrous. It's the right thing to do.
Based on your worldview and what your daddy taught you to be.
But what did you do? You now subjected yourself to a lifetime of pain, suffering, and deformity or whatever.
Yeah, that thumb story is pretty intense. Yeah. I got a group of guys that I've been involved in some training with, and we've had discussions with the students in class, and we'll give like a hypothetical just to kind of spitball around the room and hear what people are thinking. Could be like you're at the mall with your family, you got your wife and kids with you, and gunfire breaks out somewhere in the mall. What do? Like, that's all you know. You hear gunfire and people are screaming and they're running from one of the wings of the mall. And I'm going to push my family into the Cinnabon and I'm going to draw my concealed carry gun and sprint down there. What's going on down there? Yeah. And you're going to leave your family in the Cinnabon? How do you know there's not ninjas coming in through windows or 3 or 4 bad guys or, just whatever? And then you change the scenario to you're alone. And you don't, and you just hear this stuff. And my thing always is, you got kids, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I got kids. So you're going to die and leave your kids fatherless, and you have no duty or oath to any of these people in this mall. Well, the oath is, mine. Like I'm this, you're a sheepdog guy now whose job is to protect everybody in the mall or wherever you are. And maybe that is maybe that would be all of our choice in that moment. But I don't think that we think about that stuff enough. Is there going to be some picture of you over the mantle? Yeah, my dad was a hero. He stopped this guy in the mall, except he left me and my sister without a dad. I would be pretty pissed.
And 5 years later, somebody will go, yeah, I think I remember that. And that's, and life goes on for everybody but you. That's a tough decision.
Yeah, maybe you got your name on the Cinnabon chair.
And you're going to run into a situation you know nothing about. You haven't trained for it. How do you know that's not a law enforcement officer shooting a?
There you go.
And you've interjected yourself. We
don't see another dude running into a space with a gun. Yeah. Arvada, Colorado, a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was going to touch on. We can name several incidents where would-be heroes ended up making the sacrifice. Arvada's the one where the responding officer shot the guy who had just shot an officer.
Yeah, the good guy stopped the bad guy. More police were on the way, and the good guy's standing there with a firearm, and the cops pulled up and did what most anybody would expect them to do. They put him down. And
horrible situation.
Horrible for everybody, yeah.
We've had a couple mall incidents around here. The ones I'm aware of have been gang incidents. Now, the worst thing about that is there's a lot of innocent people that it's beyond their control. And I've thought about that situation, and I don't know, the cop part of me wants to try to save innocent life. The father part of me wants to get my daughter, my son's an adult, but my daughter's 15, I want to get her to safety. And then if I can provide information to responding officers, or if I can take a stand somewhere and try to get people behind me maybe something like that. But
I don't think that we're not telling anybody don't stop somebody from killing or hurting innocent people, but I think we need to, the individual needs to weigh that out.
Absolutely.
Like if you were my significant other, which you're beautiful, and I said, hey baby, I'm going to work today, I love you. Chances are, if anything bad happens in the world today, I'm going to die and not come home. Are you okay with that? Any woman or significant other would say, like, definitely not. Do not intervene in whatever idiocy's going on in the world and get your ass home, right? That's what anybody would.
Well, we look at the incident in the mall in Indiana with the young man who stopped truly heroic actions, truly risky actions. He was willing to take that risk. What if a few of his rounds skipped down that marble hallway and took out your daughter at the Cinnabons? Mm-hmm. What are you going to do?
That's the philosophical side of this discussion, where we have people say, well, if more people acted like that, we'd suppress this evil in the world. I don't know. It's kind of always been around.
It's not that clear cut.
No.
It's tremendously risky. I'm amazed at that young man's actions, his calmness under that type situation. But from my background, I can see so many ways that one little thing
could have gone sideways,
could have completely changed. Had an innocent party been hurt, he would be answering that today.
Sure.
Luckily, it wasn't. The outcome was good. He saved who knows how many lives, and I think he was truly heroic in what he did.
Agree.
But there's so much potential for a negative outcome.
So I think what we're saying is maybe contemplate these things so you're aware, and
so you can make that decision when it occurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My friend Jared Reston, he's kind of well known for having been shot 7 times. The first round entered his jaw, separated his jaw, took a bunch of teeth out, exited out his neck, and he fought back and killed that attacker. He gives this speech. I met him at a SWAT conference years ago that he was presenting at, and I had him come out and speak, and we've got a couple good recordings of it. But often in that discussion, he says, I've killed 1 million men 1 million times in 1 million ways. Mm-hmm. And people are like, oh, you're sick, you're fantasizing about that. And all he's telling people is,
preparing.
Yeah, like if right now during this discussion, somebody comes through that door and JJ Racaza is over there playing computer games and he drops the ball and stands on his phone, you got to save me, man. My back's to the door, right? So like these silly scenarios, or I'm in the hotel room. Which way is the exit? Which way is a potentiality for somebody else to come in?
Mental practice, like we were discussing earlier, that applies to all facets of self-defense. Thinking and assessing a environment, and from simple things, going into a restaurant and looking where's the closest exit that I can shove my daughter towards and say,
Get out
you
of here.
run as fast as you can and don't stop. So your practice, you're preparing for something you hope never occurs.
I think it was Colonel Cooper, one of his recorded classes down at Gunsight when he was still living. That's specifically what he says. He's envisioned this thing, and then when it happens, the way he described it, and I don't worship at the altar of Cooper, but he said a lot of great things. Mm-hmm. He said, I've seen this before. Mm-hmm. I've been here. I know what to do. I've got this solution. And I think he was very articulate in this complex thing and made it very simple. I've thought about it. I imagine myself winning. I've trained physically, morally, mentally, all of that, so that how do I draw this gun? How do I, you've got
what range time is for.
Yeah.
You practice addressing threats. And this is, we've discussed previously about competition shooting versus self-defense shooting. What are the skill sets necessary? Some of them overlap, some of them are distinctly different. There's a great emphasis out there. JJ's one of the fastest human beings I've ever seen in my life. When I see what he can do at amazing speeds, is, it's amazing to me. I'm in awe of it when I see it. Unless you're functioning at that high level, maybe you should focus on being able to properly grip the gun and address a threat, and then address multiple threats, that sort of thing. Instead of worrying about a sub-second draw. Sub-second draw has been argued ad nauseum on the internet. Split times are argued nonstop. I was just in a Facebook debate on the use of compensators on a carry gun.
That was your point. I saw that.
Yeah. Well, and that's what my son has kind of made a reputation as somebody that likes to challenge on the internet. I generally don't like to do that. I don't, because you're going to get people with strong feelings one way or the other. But it was interesting to me, the guys who said absolutely you should have a compensator, most of them are from a competitive background where those split times and that draw time is critical. In the self-defense world, you don't want to outrun your gun. There's thought processing, and your brain can only process things at a certain speed. So if you've already made your idea or your mind up that I'm going to shoot these 3 targets and I'm looking for a point whatever second split time, by the time you get to that third one, there may be a change. Maybe he's dropped the gun and thrown his hands up.
Sure.
But if you're worried about getting those 2 shots on target with that split time, what have you really accomplished?
I think this is a nuanced conversation of if you're competing and shooting at that level, you probably have a baseline of mechanical skills, or should. But then we see this stuff online and we think, if I can't do this, I'm not good enough to protect myself, or I need to have these skills to be able to protect myself.
The guys like JJ and the other shooters of that level, Ernest
Very
Langdon,
lightly built pretty boys, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely rocket ships operating the gun.
He's got earbuds in,
but
he can't hear me.
Because of his training, his level of performance is so much above what the average concealed carrier is. JJ, or somebody who can function and practices that, may be able to process faster than somebody
Based
that just
on all
picks
that
up and goes,
exposure.
hey, if I put this compensator on my gun, I can shave 1/10 off of my split times.
Sure.
And then they go out and they don't train weekly or daily like a high-level competitor does. They've got the split times accomplished, but they're not really polishing that whole package.
Sure.
And I've got nothing against compensators. I've got nothing against red dots. I've got nothing against being able, if I could do a sub-second draw, I would do it.
I think we should get you to do that on film.
I can get in the sub minute and a half area, but I'm old. But to me, as a concealed carrier, I don't want to ever be in a gunfight where a sub-second draw is what I need to save my life.
Sure.
What I want to be is that gray man in the background that does a stealth draw and is able to engage that target. Situation may not allow that. It may be, hey, I got to draw now, and I've got to address this threat right now. But it's a balancing act.
We should make a whole nother video on that discussion and what a crusty old cop thinks training should look like, and how much and what kind.
Yeah. Training for what would be my first response.
Yeah, what's the goal? I dig that.
You touched on that earlier.
What is the best way for people to get a hold of your organization to check out your products and services?
CCWSafe.com. We have a website that is interactive. You can actually click Get Started. It'll ask you a few questions. Are you wanting coverage for just you or your spouse? Are you law enforcement, military, or an honorably discharged veteran? Because we've got some built-in discounts.
Cool.
But you answer a few of those questions and it will give you a range of options. We have customer service agents that during business hours, the website's 24/7. During business hours, 8 to about 5 p.m. Central Time, you can call and speak to a rep. You can call down there and talk to me. I spend a lot of time on the road for various things, meeting with groups, responding to member incidents, that sort of thing. But you can call down there or send a message in to support at CCW Safe and get a hold of me personally.
Cool. I appreciate you taking the time to talk. You guys that have viewed this discussion, if you've got comments, put them in the comment section. If you think this information might be valuable to people that you care about, send it over to them. Let them watch and get their feedback. This stuff is not just about having a card in your wallet. It's not just about having a gun on your hip, but it's about the totality of how you go about interacting with other human beings. Don't do stupid things that create or incite violence. That's, I think, a big part of it from what I'm hearing, listening to these past stories of members.
Yeah, and you touched on lifestyle. It is a lifestyle change. There's so many things that you have to consider if you decide I'm going to carry a lethal weapon on my body every day.
I dig that. It's a good place to end it. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Tell somebody you love them and call Gary at the office. What's your extension? Don't answer that.
All right.
Don't answer that. That was a joke. Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com.
I said I got me some gunfighter gun law. Gunfighter gun law, baby. Gunfighter gun, oh, no more gunfighter blues. Made in the USA. Amazing lubricity. 100% synthetic, baby. So it's gonna last you longer. So go on CarryTrainer.com and order yourself some gunfighter gun or gunfighter lube to get rid of your gunfighter blues. I said go on and order yourself some gunfighter